Hey there. I think the current person that is here is Christy. Christy, we've got a really small crew doing this webinar. So if we want to take this as more of an office hours kind of thing, we can totally do that. So feel free to just drop any questions in the chat. Just so you know, this is being recorded. You can access the recording at the link that you used to RSVP. But we'll also send an email around to attendees, letting them know where they can see the recording. So yeah, like I said, drop any questions you have in the side of the chat. I'll be doing a slide share, and I'll also send those slides around at the end. I'm going to give it just a little bit more time to see if anybody else wants to join. But I think I maybe scheduled this not knowing that it was St. Patrick's Day, and quite a few people are out of the office or doing things on their lunch break that are not conducive to a webinar. So yeah, if you want to drop a little bit about what you're looking to learn in the chat, feel free. And I'll get started in like 2 minutes, probably earlier than that. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and get us started. So I'm going to share my screen just to show some slides. So you should be able to see my Google Slides right now. So if any of this stuff is old hat to you, no worries, just let me know and we can blitz right past it. Okay, so let's get started. Podcasting for higher education. Is podcasting right for me? And how do I get started if it is? So hello, I'm Caitlin Van Horn. I'm the Senior Podcast Marketing Manager. I work at AdsWiz, which you probably know if you're an AudioGO customer. So AudioGO is an AdsWiz product. We also offer like a CMS solution for podcasters called Simplecast, as well as all of the AdsWiz monetization tools. But we all work together like a nice, holistic, happy family. So I've been working in podcasting for about 3 years now, and one of my favorite things is to help different businesses, different people in different businesses figure out if podcasting makes sense for them, why and how to actually get started. So that's a little bit of what we'll be doing today. So what is a podcast? We'll go through this really quickly. A podcast is a series of spoken word audio episodes, all focused on a particular topic or a theme, like cycling or startups. You can subscribe or follow a show with an app on your phone and listen to episodes whenever you like on your headphones, in the car, or through speakers. They can be any length, from a 1-minute news snippet to a 3-hour in-depth interview. They can be any frequency, from daily or monthly. They can be any format, from simple solo shows to mammoth multi-person audio dramas. And they can cover any topic, many of which would never make it onto radio. Simply put, a podcast is an audio program. It's just like talk radio, but you subscribe to it on your smartphone, or you download episodes whenever you like, and you can listen to it whenever you like. Who listens to podcasts? These stats are actually just a little bit out of date. There's the Edison Infinite Dial, which is like a great report on who listens to podcasts, came out like 2 days ago. So 144 million people listen to podcasts. 90 million people listened in the last month. There is generally an even split between men and women, but 45% of them have incomes over 75K. 40% of them are between 18 and 34 years old, and about 35% of them are between 35 and 54 years old. 51% are employed full-time. So podcast listeners, on the whole, are more affluent and generally have more education, which I think makes them a great fit as an audience when you think about institutes of higher education. So how are businesses using podcasts? Well, it's really important to know how they're not. So if you want to use something that has a direct response, so you can easily say like, this person did this, listened to this podcast and did this thing, that's podcast advertising. So like that one-to-one attribution, you're going to want to look more at podcast advertising, because podcasts themselves, they generate awareness at like the top of the funnel. So they're more of a brand marketing tool than they are a performance marketing tool. So that can look like real estate agents giving advice to first-time home buyers, or contractors offering DIY solutions, or a fishing supply company interviewing well-known figures in the scene. These are all real examples of podcasts that exist. And they generate brand awareness and interest in their prospective clientele. So is every person who listens to that real estate agent going to buy a house from them? Probably not, but some people might. And if you think about it as a funnel, it's the beginning of the purchase funnel. Obviously for higher education, I don't know that you would necessarily consider this a purchase, but it's when people are in the consideration phase. All right, I am going to flip back to the chat just to make sure we don't have any questions. Nope, all good, cool. All right, so is a podcast right for your goals? I think it's important, as much as I'm like, everyone should have a podcast. That's not entirely true, or everyone should have a podcast, but it's there to get specific things done for you. So I think some helpful questions to ask yourself are, does the audiences that we spoke about, do those sound like your audience? I would say that in the case of higher education, people who already are more educated and generally are more affluent, that's probably the correct audience. As far as the breakdown of what age groups listen, it sounds like we nicely encapsulate people who are looking at colleges, as well as like potential alumni or parents of people looking at colleges. Does what a podcast can do fit into your business and marketing objectives? Like I said, if you are looking exclusively at performance marketing, you want to advertise on a podcast. You don't necessarily want to start your own. But if you're like, oh, I wish we could draw more attention to X initiative that we're doing, or put a spotlight on an amazing department that we have, or re-engage with alumni who might not be engaging with us, then a podcast is a great call. And third, the most important thing is, do you have resources dedicated to creating a podcast? So a lot of things you'll hear when you start researching podcasts are, oh, it's such a low barrier to entry, and it's not as resource intensive. And that's certainly true compared to, say, a YouTube channel. But you can't make something out of nothing, and you do need to have either a person or a budget or an agency. You need to have some resources available to make sure that your podcast is as good as it can possibly be. Okay, so how do higher education institutions use podcasts? So we've got a few on the Simplecast platform. So I looked in to see what they were doing, and these are generally the buckets that they fall into. So first of all is recruitment, and I will say that this is a really new development, and it seemed to start mostly around during the COVID lockdowns. People obviously weren't traveling. You couldn't have that like college tour in-person experience. But you still did want to get to know like what's happening on student life, or what does student life look like? What does life on campus look like? So in addition to other collateral that they were creating, we saw a lot of like college admissions offices creating recruitment podcasts that are aimed specifically at prospective students. We also see people that do podcasts around specific on-campus activities. So we recently had a university set up multiple accounts for department podcasts. So like, oh, your theology department, your medieval studies department, so that they could both, attract like positive attention to those departments, but also keep people in the loop about what they're doing. Lots of stuff about student life. And obviously, I think the real easy one that a lot of people think of is podcasts around student athletics. But the other two big ones that we see coming up are alumni engagement. So, you know, a lot of these start out as like interview shows with people who are alumni. And that's to like both re-engage people who are not currently engaging with their alma mater, but also to like just give another way to connect. Because I think it's like, oh, well, we have a newsletter, we have a campus magazine, we have an email list, but sometimes those are not the right channels for people. A podcast allows you to tell a longer, more intimate story. And I think for alumni engagement, that was particularly attractive. And then the last one is donor engagement and cultivation. Now, obviously, this is kind of like a spectrum from like alumni to donor engagement. But, you know, we had a lot of institutions of higher learning that really wanted to put a spotlight on like the philanthropy that they were doing, the development work that they were doing, and be able to broadcast that to donors. And again, like we said before, the audience for a podcast in general is more affluent, better educated, and we do see this like older segment of the population listening to them, and that segment is only growing. So again, another channel to reach out and engage some potential donors. And the other thing about these is that we saw them on timed releases. So obviously the recruitment podcasts, they were released starting just before like recruitment season for colleges, and went through basically to admissions. On-campus activities were obviously coming out during the part of the year when people were on campus, and then donor engagement generally focused around an end-of-year pledging campaign. So this is not to say that if you do want to do all of these, you have to put things out all year long. They can be timed, they can be around seasons, and in fact, that can be a more targeted way of doing that. Okay, I am going to flip back once again to the chat, and we're good. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Like I said, this is being recorded. I'll also email you the slides. So you'll have my email address, so you can always just email me questions too. Okay, let's see, next one. So how do you make a podcast? And this is where I think this first step here, ideation, is one that a lot of people want to rush right over. They want to start buying microphones and researching editors' rates. But I think this one is actually the most important one. And again, I love a good set of questions. I feel like they help you get really focused. So in that ideation phase, what you should be asking is, who are you trying to reach? What do you want to do? What content resonates with the audience you selected? For instance, if you're trying to reach if you're trying to reach prospective donors and you want them to donate money to your organization, appealing to an older, like a boomer generation is going to be a lot different than appealing to recent graduates. And you'll have to change your content appropriately. And then what's your show format? Is it an interview show? Is it a chat cast? Are you doing like deeply reported pieces? How often will you publish? I think people think, oh, it's a podcast, I have to do it once a week. No, you don't. You could do it once every 2 weeks. You could do it once a month. You could do it once a week for 3 months and then take a 2-month hiatus. There's a lot of different ways that you can figure out a cadence that works for both your audience and your workflow. And then how many hours a week can you dedicate to your show? This is important. This is about thinking about those resources and what you have to give to your show, because if you want to do one of those like deeply reported journalistic shows, you only have about an hour a week, you might be better off doing an interview. What's your budget? You do need one. You can make really compelling podcasts with a small budget. It is extremely hard to make a compelling podcast with no budget. And then really importantly, how will you measure success? I think a lot of times people have a hard time justifying the budget or the time, whatever you're investing into a podcast, because they're not attaching like success metrics around it. But if you can say, oh, I want to see this percentage increase in our recruitment, or I want to see this percentage increase in like end of year donations from previously unengaged donors, then you can say like, oh, we had a great return on investment of a podcast. Let's keep doing that. And if something is not delivering, then you have that information and you can say, okay, what can we change? Is it a different format? Are we doing a different audience? Do we release weekly instead of monthly? But you can't do that if you haven't set up the foundation to evaluate the success of your podcast. Okay, so creation, that's our second bullet point. And that's where people get really excited. So research and script your podcast. Even chat casts where it's just like 4 people in a room around a microphone, even those have tons of research that go into them, or at least the good ones do. You should know about the people you want to have on if you're having guests. You should have like a pretty good outline of what you want to talk about. And like I would suggest, even if you're not reading off a script, you want to create an outline that you can follow. Record. That's a big one. So, I think there's 2 great ways to get started with this. People want to know like what kind of microphone and what kind of software. I think the like easy recommendation for everyone is a Blue Yeti microphone. It's very easy to set up. It's like a great beginner microphone. After you do your first set of episodes and you're like, this is great, we got sign off for more budget, go ahead and upgrade if you want to. But I know plenty of people who have been podcasting for 4, 5, 6, 7 years and who have very successful shows, and they have never upgraded from the Blue Yeti they first bought. And I also really like to use Zencastr, which is, it allows you to record like not in the same room. So you can do remote recording. And that's really great, yes, because of COVID, but also if you're interviewing some alumni who live in different areas and you can't necessarily bring them back, use something like Zencastr. You will need to edit. I think sometimes people think, oh, like podcasts, they're so informal. You can just upload it straight to a program like Simplecast. You should do some light editing. And you can do that through products like Audacity, GarageBand, or Adobe products. There are so many good YouTube tutorials on how to do editing, or you can hire someone. There are wonderful podcast editors all over the place that you can hire. Especially if you know other people in your network that have started podcasts, it's worth asking them. I mean, about any of this stuff, but it's worth asking them like, hey, who did you use to edit? Like, what kind of microphone are you using? Can you show me how to do this thing in GarageBand? And then you will need a podcast host. And in this situation, we don't mean like the co-host or like the person who's speaking. Audio files are really big. They cost a lot of money to host on your own. And your host will also distribute your podcast to all the places that people listen, like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. That is what Simplecast does. And they will also give you a lot of analytics. So that's the host that you need. Then distribution, again, your host will do this for you. It will put it all the places that people listen to podcasts. You should definitely think about your promotion. So that can include social media, word of mouth, newsletters, flyers, but really you should be leveraging your existing channels. There's no need to create a new Twitter account for your podcast when you already have one with a really great engaged community. Like, utilize that. Also, you're starting a new podcast. You don't need to make additional work for yourself. And then measurement. Like, measurement is a really big part of podcasting success because you won't know what works unless you're measuring it. So there are some specific podcasting metrics that you can look at. So downloads, that is every time someone downloads an episode. You can also look at unique listeners, which is a specific metric that Simplecast offers. While a download can be, me accidentally downloading a podcast 6 times or accidentally downloading your entire last season, a unique listener will count me as just one person listening to this many episodes. And that just adds more nuance. It lets you know if you're actually reaching new people or if you have like a small group of really dedicated listeners who listen to every episode. And then there are some other metrics that are not unique to podcasting. Oh, sorry. One that I did forget in podcasting is your completion rate. So your podcast host should be able to show you how far into your episode someone listens. And this is a really great metric because you can see like, oh, if people keep dropping off in the last 15 minutes, like, what's that segment? I guess it's not resonating, or maybe our podcast is just too long. Yeah, and then those other metrics that are not podcast specific. So press hits, referrals, social media mentions, word of mouth. This is stuff that you're probably used to if you like work in a marketing function, but you can use those to measure your podcast success. Yeah, so this is me. This is my email. It's just Caitlin@simplecast.com. I'm going to flip back to the chat to see if we have any questions. And it looks like we don't currently. So I'm going to give us all back a little bit of time. You'll receive a follow-up email from me with a recording of this session, so you can watch it at any time. I'll also include the slides that I shared, and then a discount code so that if you do decide you want to get started podcasting, we can make it really easy for you to get started on Simplecast. Thank you all so much for joining us, and hopefully I'll talk to you soon.